Series Taoiseach.
In a democracy, the will of the people as expressed at the ballot box is sovereign.
And he said, Bertie, we've worked something out. He says, you're the only one in this room, as far as we know, that hasn't murdered somebody.
I enjoyed almost every minute of it. And obviously, I would have liked to have done it for a little while longer.
The first thing John Major said, you have to tell me about Ireland. I don't know anything about Ireland. I may be the Prime Minister, but I don't know anything about it.
Within an hour, I found myself in a lot more trouble than I expected to be in.
We are living way beyond our means.
The Irish government can no longer stand by and see innocent people injured.
When is the general election likely to be?
Well, it's not due till February next year, and it'll be sometime between now and then.
It's in the interest of the country. If responsibility should now pass to a younger man.
The Irish nation was in a disgraceful condition under the external relations.
We do not wish to seek quarrels with any country.
The apparatus through which I am now speaking affords one very stimulating thought that gives no opportunity for the opposition to interrupt.
Following a general election in November 1982, Fine Gael won its biggest ever election victory, and Garret Fitzgerald became Taoiseach for the second time.
Garret Fitzgerald.
Dr. Fitzgerald's immediate priority is to stitch together a workable coalition with the Labour Party, but he made it clear that establishing better relations with Britain will be high on the agenda of his new administration. The Irish economy, once the envy of Europe, is a shambles, and the country saddled with enormous foreign debts. With the election over, price increases are forecast on practically everything, including beer, which is already £1 a pint here, petrol, now around £2 a gallon, and bus and train fares. The left-wing Labour Party and the centre-right Fine Gael are bound to have widely divergent opinions over how the economy should be handled.
The country was in one hell of a mess in the early 80s. The Labour Party were under enormous pressure, obviously to try to protect social services. Garret was under enormous pressure from international bankers and from the central bank here to curtail public expenditure. So I think we did our best in very difficult circumstances, and perhaps if the personal relationship wasn't as good as it was between Garret and myself, I don't think it would have lasted.
At the beginning, the age difference, I think, was a problem for him. He was a year younger than my eldest son, and it took a little while, to come to terms with that. But in fact, because we're both social democrats and it's absolutely a similar approach to what politics is about, we had an excellent relationship. There was never any problem with him at all. We both had problems with our parties, of course, but not with each other.
He was looking for, if you like, a new kind of government. He wanted to move away from the kind of stasis of old traditional politics and get some new thinking.
Garret believed that it was important to thrash everything out at Cabinet and for people to speak freely at Cabinet. Bearing in mind that every Cabinet Minister is a Chief Executive of a government department, one has to ask, is that sort of free-flowing discussion the best use of their time?
When he came in and was trying to run the government originally, the government became a type of debating society, and he had to be reminded again, more than once, that the government is there to make decisions. It's not there for discussions and arguments, although it has to argue and it has to discuss. But these things would go on all day and sometimes most of the night.
Well, there is a thing called cabinet confidentiality, so I can't go into any great detail, but they weren't great, to be honest. I know that I'm a non-smoker now for many years, but I think I ended up eating cigars at that time because meetings went on for so long. And Garret loved meetings. You know, that was fine. Garret had 10 minutes to go home. I had about 4 hours to go home. And, you know, it was all done in the best interest of the country. But I think I would have said that later cabinets were probably more efficient, and we got business done more efficiently.
He didn't really connect with people. You know, he had his own followers.
He won 70 seats.
Yeah, but
he didn't connect with them. Come on.
He's the most successful modern Fine Gael leader
He was attractive,
in winning votes.
charismatic. But when he
and you're saying he
spoke
didn't
about
connect with
issues,
people?
he was able to connect with people out there and convince them to come with. He got elected.
How did Fine Gael get so many?
Because he was charismatic and attractive.
But yet not able to connect with people.
That's a different thing. On an issue, to be able to sell an issue, to be able to say to people, I am now going to change the view of our society in relation to Northern Ireland, historically. I am going to bring you with me. When he spoke, he was not able to do that. That's the problem.
I had said during the election campaign that one of the things we needed to address was trying to get some agreement in the South between the political parties in relation to our policy towards Northern Ireland. And yeah, as you're aware, then we set up the New Ireland Forum. We started, if you like, a road to peace in Northern Ireland, and certainly in combination with John Hume, I think we started a process that ultimately ended up, you know, 15 years later in the Good Friday Agreement.
So it was a deliberate attempt to, as it were, present from Dublin a well-thought-out answer to the Northern question. Dr. Fitzgerald operated on the idea that joint authority is the beginning of a negotiating strategy, and it allowed the beginnings of a discussion which the officials of two sides could talk together with the whole idea of Irish unity pushed way, way down the line. That was its significance.
The report was published, as we now know, and there were three options: Federal Ireland, joint sovereignty, a unitary state. The meeting took place sometime later, involving Fitzgerald and Thatcher in London. This was in the wake of the publication of the New Ireland Forum, and when the meeting broke up and Gareth Fitzgerald went to the Irish Embassy, where we had all gathered at this point in time, to give his press conference, Mrs. Thatcher was giving her press conference. And unknown to Gareth Fitzgerald, as I understand it, she very specifically declared all options as out.
I have made it quite clear, and so did Mr. Pryor when he was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, that a unified Ireland was one solution that is out. A second solution was a confederation of two states. That is out. A third solution was joint authority. That is out. That is a derogation from sovereignty.
We moved away from that. We're now looking at an alternative model altogether. Happened months past. So when she was asked about the three models, she said perfectly correctly, they're not on. They weren't. We hadn't been even talking about them for months past. But of course the journalists didn't know that, and they took it. This was, and she said it in such a strong voice. She had a very powerful voice. That they thought the whole thing collapsed. And I, unfortunately, when I went to my press conference, I didn't know what she'd said at the end. I went in knowing nothing of this, and I was told what she'd said. I didn't know what that was all about. I hadn't a clue. And I gave probably the 7 worst television interviews of my life at that stage.
Can I take you back to a very specific point that Mrs. Thatcher made? She said that in regard to the 3 forum options, and this was put to you earlier, but I wonder if you could be specific. She said a unitary state was out, federalism or confederalism was out, joint sovereignty was out, and that you knew her position, which was that she was looking for political stability in Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. Could you comment on that?
Well, the forum, first of all, the forum report doesn't refer to joint sovereignty, it refers to joint authority. I'm not sure. I wasn't at a press conference. I don't know whether you're quoting her correctly or not in that respect. What was talked about here is joint authority. The forum report also said we are open to hear to other views. Next morning I realized we had a huge advantage now, because she had the impact on public opinion in Britain, worldwide, in Ireland was very negative for her, and her advisors and some of her ministers would be telling her, that that was a mistake, Margaret. And she came over here about 10 days later, to a European Council meeting, and a private bilateral meeting in the course of it, and said, Garrett, what did I do wrong? I explained it was her tone of voice.
It determined for him, however, not to lie down, because flowing from that, he started again, started afresh, with the civil servants, working towards what essentially became the Anglo-Irish Agreement.
Mrs. Thatcher arrived at Hillsborough by helicopter. The two leaders put their names to agreement. The two are united in hoping it will reduce violence in the province by isolating the extremists. But in terms of selling it, their needs are very different. Dr. Fitzgerald needs to convince the South that a historic breakthrough has been made and that Dublin will have a real say in the North. Mrs. Thatcher, on the other hand, needs to minimise the concessions and reassure the Unionists that nothing of substance has been given away.
Garrett was able, at least in the first instance, to make a very kind of honest list of saying, look, we will give you the security cooperation that you need if you allow us this consultative role within the North.
From a security point of view, and calming things down and stopping unnecessary trouble, it was very effective. The other thing was that I knew the Unionists wouldn't like it. And of course, party agreement was that if they had power sharing, we wouldn't need that anymore. It was a bait to attract them to power sharing. Unfortunately, they failed to see that, and it took a long time before they came round to accepting power sharing. But it was a good system, a temporary system, for the time being, and it doesn't exist in that form now. But it worked well. Eventually, it led to the peace process. So it was worth doing.
By December 1985, Des O'Malley had left Fianna Fáil and launched the Progressive Democrats. This new party proved attractive to those in Fine Gael who had become disillusioned with the government's failure to tackle the economic crisis. However, Fitzgerald was determined to pursue liberal reforms, and in the summer of 1986, he proposed a divorce referendum.
It's providing the people with an opportunity to express itself on this subject. The parties in government are conscious that divergent views may be held on whether the introduction of divorce on the restrictive basis proposed is for the social good or is necessary for the relief of cases of marital breakdown where spouses have entered into or propose entry into another union. It seemed to me that the failure to provide for divorce is undermining marriage, because there were so many people who were entering second relationships, having children, recognised neither by church nor state, that the whole position of marriage is being undermined. And a moderate programme to provide for divorce with various safeguards seems to me more likely to protect marriage.
Fine Gael is a conservative, right-wing Catholic party, immensely slow to move. Trying to turn it into a reforming party was like trying to put a submarine into space. And he had so many ambitions: constitutional reform, transformation of the relationship between Britain and Ireland. But he didn't know that you can't just wish these things upon a political institution such as Dáil Éireann and an entire people.
It wasn't necessarily the way forward in terms of, the constitutional crusade in relation to, for example, divorce. That this was brought in as a kind of a totem of kind of liberalism, as a holy grail that could be delivered to deliver Ireland into some kind of, promised modernity. And yet, no attention whatsoever was attended to the actual real situation of families and how they might live and survive this kind of new culture. So it was like, I'm a liberal, you must have divorce. If you're modern, you must have divorce, and you must agree with me.
Those who are opposed to divorce very cleverly mobilised property interests against us. And I'm afraid now property takes precedence over everything else. So we lost that referendum. Perhaps couldn't handle it better, but I thought it was important to try to put it through.
The failure of the divorce referendum was a blow to the Fitzgerald-led government. However, it was problems with the economy which would lead to its ultimate collapse.
The economy was still in very poor straits. There would have been major cuts required in health and education and social services, which our party certainly couldn't stand over at that time. I suppose, in fairness to say, it was a polite disagreement about policy before the election, and the Labour Party really couldn't vote on the cuts that were being proposed by Fine Gael at that time. So we amicably decided we should go different ways.
It really happened before Christmas, but we all decided no point ruining Christmas. Let's have a disagreement after Christmas. We postponed the break. And then we arranged that they would leave at 12 o'clock and go out the front steps and announce they were leaving, and I'd have press conference at 3 o'clock, and I would announce what Fine Gael was proposing and present the budget not to the Dáil but to the people. And we presented the budget to the people. The people voted us out of office, and the new government implemented exactly what I proposed. And it worked all right. I mean, to the country, not from the party point of view, but there you are.
Charles Haughey, although optimistic this morning,
very happy,
must now be resigned to a minority government, a total of 81 seats, and 3 short of the overall majority he needed for his Fianna Fáil party.
He was back in where he wanted to be, you know, and I suppose, you know, if you're in politics, you want to be where the power is. Then they, you know, the Fianna Fáil realised that, you know, despite the great old posters they had up saying that health cuts hurt the old, the weak and the, you know, etc., etc., they get into government and they did all the things they wouldn't let us do for the previous 4 years. And the rest is history.
Charlie came back, and at a meeting he said, "Gentlemen, this country is on the brink of collapse. I don't want any proposal from any minister here that will increase expenditure. I want proposals for reductions. And anybody who produces proposals for increases will be asked to leave this room and leave this government." The next meeting, one minister turns up and says, "Taoiseach, I have a great arrangement here. We can probably get a lot of votes in my area." And the Taoiseach nearly leaped out of his chair. "Do you not listen to what I say? I told you not to bring proposals for expenditure. What sort of a fucking idiot are you?" And thumps the table and so on. You could see all around the proposals going under the table. But he took a very, very, very strong line, and he said, "I'm doing this because if we don't, the country is gone." He was very strongly supported by McSharry, who was his Minister for Finance, and by Alan Dukes.
I felt that if we could get a basic acceptance across the major political parties, that economic, fiscal common sense was a baseline from which we had to work, then there was a value in that.
Fine Gael said, "We won't put the national interest at risk, and therefore we'll support you in pursuing the type of policies that we feel Ireland needs." And then, of course, Haughey came back in and was able to do that with the support of Dukes on the other side of the table.
He was rather baffled at the beginning, because this wasn't the kind of politics that he was used to. And I have a feeling, although I've never discussed this in detail in these terms with Ray McSharry, I have a feeling that McSharry probably told him, "Look, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Don't say too much about it in case you might say the wrong thing."
The economy began to improve during the late 1980s. However, in 1989, Charles Haughey made a decision which would ultimately alter the core values of Fianna Fáil.
In '89, the Labour Party put a motion down in the Dáil in relation to making financial assistance available for haemophiliacs. And I think it was a sum in the region of 250,000. And we won the motion, a private member's motion. I remember Brendan Howland actually took the motion time. And Mr. Haughey was on a trip to Japan at the time, during which the Japanese Prime Minister resigned while he was there. And the story goes that Mr. Haughey got off the government jet, and of course there were no mobile phones in those days, so he had no communication while he was in the air. And he was told that the Labour Party had defeated the government on a motion, and he'd have to go in on a confidence motion. And I won't quote what he said directly, but the gist of it was, no, we're not going to do a conference, but we're going to the country. simple as that.
And he called an election, of which there was no need. But anyway, we duly came back. We lost 4 seats. I remember that distinctly. And we came back, and he made a tryst with the derided and hated PDs, which was most unusual and must have lots of ongoing repercussions later on in the whole matter.
One of their principal core values was that they didn't enter into coalitions. And anyway, they did. It was how he forced a number of them against their will to do that. He was shrewd enough, I suppose, to see that that was the only way out.
Plus, I suppose he had smelt the aphrodisiac of power, and was he going to let it go? Not likely.
And they went into government with the PDs, another exciting time in the history of Irish politics. Mr. O'Malley and Mr. Hoy got together. Great chemistry. It was testing, a lot of testosterone around the room, I'd say, at that time.
It was always a bit of a struggle. You were always watching out, and you were watching behind your back as well as in front. But you could survive that, and we did for a good while.
In coalition with the PDs, Hoy had to embrace old enemies, but soon he would turn against an old friend. During the 1990 presidential election campaign, controversy erupted over whether or not the Fianna Fáil candidate Brian Lenihan had phoned Áras an Uachtaráin in January 1982 in an attempt to influence the president.
What I'm saying is this, very specifically, that I did not ring President Hillary on that night, I did not speak to him on that night or on any other night.
Under pressure to resolve the ensuing controversy, Hoy fired his old friend.
Charlie Hoy never recovered from it. He didn't, because people felt that he had run down a friend.
And it was really, I suppose, the beginning of the for Charlie Hoy, really, when he, it was cruel to see him standing there and, shafting Brian Lenihan the way he did at the time. But that's politics, as they say, but it was very cruel to watch and to be part of.
Throughout 1991, Hoy began to lose his grip on power. A series of events contributed to his eventual downfall. His Minister for Finance, Albert Reynolds, declared his intention to stand for leadership of the party if Hoy resigned. This was followed by a motion of no confidence in Hoy. He survived the vote and fired those responsible. However, an incident from his past would prove his undoing when a phone tapping scandal was reignited.
Then, early '92, the late Sean Doherty did what he would have thought at the time a pretty reasonably inconsequential interview with Shea Healy. I think it was called Nighthawks or something, where he signalled that the tapping of phones when Sean was Minister for Justice, Doc said it was known that Charlie Hoy knew about that.
And I consulted with the authorities at that time, and one of the methods that was decided upon was the telephone tapping of phones, and anybody else that says otherwise or tries to abandon himself or herself from that situation is not telling the truth.
And that led to the Progressive Democrats in government putting them in a position naturally is that it wasn't going to be possible then to continue to support him. And Charlie Hoy, without emotion or anything, knew the game was up, and he resigned as leader of Fianna Fáil.
Statements made by Senator Sean Doherty yesterday to the effect that he showed me transcripts of telephone conversations by 2 journalists whose telephones were tapped in 1982 are absolutely false. They are in stark contradiction with a number of statements made by Senator Doherty at that time. I wish to state categorically that I was not aware at the time of the tapping of these telephones.
The whole telephone tapping and Sean Doherty's intervention and thing, and this was the trigger people needed, to ease him out the door.
I would think certainly within his own party there was just oh, for God's sake, we cannot go on with this anymore, you've got to go, I've got to go, I don't know what went on in the man's head, but I think I would suspect he just simply ran out of options, that there was no credible alternative, there was no realistic, there was no viable alternative but to resign.
he was on the radio one day and he was being asked, you know, Mr. Haughey, you're moving on in age now. It might have been late 60s or 70s possibly. And I recall, and I'll never forget, he said, look at the Chinese, they go on and on and on. Can't I go on and on? And he was gone within a fortnight.
And then he left with that famous speech in the Dáil, I have done the state some service, but enough of that.
Might quote perhaps Othello. I have done the state some service, they know it, no more of that. If I were to seek any accolade as I leave us, it would simply be he served the people, all the people, to the best of his ability.
There he is, in retirement. He has left the Dáil. I have done the state some service. I mean, fantastic, the theatricality of it, you know, I mean, and everybody showers him with good wishes, and he gallops off into the sunset and retirement. And he must have thought at that point, sort of, I've got away with it. I'm out of here, you know, and they'll argue over my legacy, but I'm happy enough with it. And it all falls apart because of what emerges then in the tribunal. He is portrayed relentlessly over the succeeding however many years it is, but many years, as this venal, corrupt politician who is to such an extraordinarily grubby extent receiving money from people. It wasn't just a sort of one-off deal where he got squillions, and it was relentless, it was grubby, it was cheap, it was nasty. He won't be remembered for that alone, for sure, but I think it'll live long in the memory.
The Moriarty Tribunal in 2006, when it published its first report, uncovered an embedded network of rogue accountants, businessmen, bankers and politicians, most notably the former Taoiseach Charles Haughey. And the tribunal stated on page 543 of its report that inescapable conclusions must be drawn that he, Charles Haughey, received a wide range of substantial payments, and that certain of the acts or decisions on his part while Taoiseach were referable to some of these payments. The tribunal has conservatively identified payments received by Haughey between when he became Taoiseach in 1979 until 1996 at almost £10 million. In contemporary terms, the tribunal has calculated that at €45 million, which is 171 times Haughey's gross salary.
He was corruptly. This is one of the big issues. Sorry, yes, sir. Oh, yes, it did. There was. Everyone was talking about it at the time. No, they were. There were lots of people. You remember the famous story that was written about AIB writing off his bank loans that the Evening Press published, Des Crowley? There were lots of people. Vincent Brown was asking questions at the time.
I remember writing
there
off
were lots of people
who were never accused of being
hold
corrupt.
on a second. That's not back at that time. And that's not the point anyway. The point is that there was a suspicion about Charles Haughey going a long way back that he had not earned his money through honest means.
The great tragedy of Charlie Haughey was that he had the potential to be a magnificent Taoiseach, but his preoccupation with wealth and power clouded his judgment in the end.
It was brazen beyond belief what he did. And if you had a conscience, and if you followed the traditional rules of right and wrong, I would have thought even Mr. Haughey would have found it very difficult to live with himself. Hence my belief that he thought, you know, like the lorry lad, because I'm worth it.
Most of us assumed that whatever wealth he'd accumulated in those years, both before he went into government and then in the period when he was out of office, those 7 years. That was our belief, that was my understanding, and you know, I never questioned it. It was a surprise, but there you are.
You have to look at all the achievements, all the legislation he brought forward as a minister, all the projects he initiated as Taoiseach, his role in the peace process, his role in the Celtic Tiger, and I think his achievements will be fully recognised and appreciated in due course.
I think the balance will probably be bad, because the bad things he did were very bad, and they defined his time as Taoiseach. I remember actually writing an analysis myself. The headline on the piece was, "I did the state." full stop. And I think that might be how history will see him.
Following the resignation of Charles Haughey, Albert Reynolds succeeded him as Taoiseach and remained in coalition with the PDs. However, Reynolds made significant changes in other areas.
It was an extraordinary time because you had a regime of Fianna Fáil ministers who had been in office for many, many, many years, and Albert then set out to change and bring in new blood.
He axed 8 government ministers. Now, you know, he had every right to do it. Of course he had, because that's the prerogative of a Taoiseach appoints ministers, and then he unappoints them, or disappoints them, I suppose, but the word is unappoint. 8 of us were told, in a very brusque manner, one by one by one by one, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. I was second last in, and I chose to argue with him as to why he was letting me go. I said, why am I being let go? Have I done wrong in my job? Tell me, tell me, tell me. Because I hadn't. And he said, give up that old guff out of you. And yeah, we were all demoted. I was made a junior minister, and some of them were cast into outer darkness, never to reappear. But I expect he felt he was making a clean break. There was a sort of psychological side to it. He was making a clean break, and he was going to show, I'm the boss. I'll say who's in cabinet or who isn't.
Albert gets the job. He comes in. He hits the PDs. He really thinks they're a lot of smart-aleck people from the law library and places where he didn't want to be. Albert just didn't like the cut of Desi's jib, and Desi certainly could not bear to be near Albert, so it just couldn't succeed.
Mr. Reynolds really had very little time for the PDs, and it was only a matter of time before that was going to end in tears, and so it did.
A tribunal had been established in 1991 to investigate alleged irregularities in the beef industry. At this beef tribunal, Des O'Malley criticised Albert Reynolds for decisions he had taken as Minister for Industry and Commerce regarding the granting of export credit insurance.
The minute he did that, the minute Des O'Malley, I knowing Albert Reynolds and other colleagues of mine who were then in the government and friends of mine and friends of Albert, I remember saying to one of them, oh my God, Albert, no matter what we say, when Albert goes down there, he's going to really nail this fella, no matter what it's going to cost us.
Albert Reynolds responded by calling O'Malley's statement dishonest. The increased antipathy between the two men led to the PDs leaving government and a general election called for November 1992.
It was a dreadful election for us, and we should have been going out of power. And the Labour Party had a massive election to double their representation at all. It was referred to as the spring tide. Dick Spring was in the ascendancy in the Labour Party. It was their great election. We expected to be going out of government, and lo and behold, Dick more or less ended up saving us. Just as we were just to be thrown down into hell, up Roy rides Dick and the Labour Party, and into government we go with the Labour Party.
Once they realised there was a possibility of staying in government, they very quickly, if you like, responded to the Labour Party programme for government, and effectively said, yeah, we can accept your programme, guys, let's put a government together, let's go into government.
My very first press conference in Jury's Hotel, I set out 2 political objectives for my term as Taoiseach. And one was to bring peace to Ireland, and the other one was to grow the economy, to tackle immigration and unemployment. People thought it was mad in the head at the time that neither was achievable or attainable. But that wasn't my view, and I was going to give it a try.
Following the general election in November 1992, Albert Reynolds was elected Taoiseach. He immediately identified peace in Northern Ireland as one of his main political objectives.
His role in the peace process, in my view, he hasn't been given sufficient credit for it. I thought he took very important initiatives to bring about a peaceful solution to an ongoing problem, historically ongoing problem, that was blighting the island of Ireland for so many, many years.
I hadn't been recognised as such down here as having any interest in Northern Ireland, but I felt that I knew more about Northern Ireland than most politicians down here. I felt I knew more of the people up there than anybody, and I felt that I had a reasonable chance of being able to convince them on both sides that there was a different way forward, and that killing people was not the answer.
Many people have asked, why did he become so obsessed with the North? Well, from his previous way of life, the showband world and being a promoter, he was quite connected with the North. He promoted bands, and he did know quite a lot of people up north. He had that connection. He was also in business. He did a lot of business with Northerners in his own world of meat, etc., etc. So there was that gra, I think is the word I would use. He seen that sort of a gra for the North. He didn't see it as a foreign territory.
We went over, and the first thing John Major said, I suppose you're here to talk about Ireland? And I said, yes, absolutely. First item on the agenda. And he said, you have to tell me about Ireland. I don't know anything about Ireland. I may be the Prime Minister, but I don't know anything about it. He says, I never was involved in it, never studied it. I don't know. But I have an open mind. And I said, John, it's as simple as this, that if you look back at the Government of Ireland Act 1920, you'll see I'm here. Because in that, I said, with the document that's presented along with legislations, you'll see the commitments and the ideas and the promises and everything that was supposed to follow, which never happened. That's why the two of us are tonight. And he says, so where do we start? We started the 1920 Act. And he says, okay, I see where you're coming from. Now, he says, what about, will we ever get rid of guns? And I said, John, will you take one word of advice? Leave the guns at the bottom of the agenda. Last thing to be talked about. We have the rest done, we'll get rid of the guns. And I'll take personal responsibility for that. He said, that's fine. And he did. He left it at the agenda. While I was there, he left it at the bottom of the agenda. And the result of doing business was, as you know, it took 15 months to draft together the Downing Street Declaration.
The Taoiseach and I have now agreed on a joint declaration on Northern Ireland. It is a declaration for democracy and dialogue, and it is based on consent. It makes no compromise on strongly held principles, but it does embody our common view that there is an opportunity to end violence for good in Northern Ireland.
Our central message is that both communities can fulfil their ideals and aspirations best through the democratic system. That there is absolutely no need for violence, which only deepens divisions between communities.
The significance of the Downing Street Declaration is it cuts through a lot of the traditional problems that have been felt in Irish political discourse around the notion of consent, partition, and so on. Because what it says is that, on the one hand, both governments say there is one people in Ireland and it has a right of self-determination. Now that is, that going back to 1918, that is the classic Sinn Féin position, right? So if you like the Irish nationalist view of the matter, as opposed to the traditional unionist view, which is that there are two peoples who have a right of self-determination. The Irish nationalist view of the matter is endorsed by the Downing Street Declaration. But then, no sooner does the Declaration define the problem in that Irish nationalist way, is that in the next sentence, the Irish government, a Fianna Fáil government, the Albert Reynolds government says, but the Irish government says that that right of self-determination should only be operated with the consent of a majority in Northern Ireland. So you get the principle of consent placed in there as a result of the voice of the Irish government articulating it.
he was in real danger that at some point in this process, the talks he was having with Provos were going to be revealed, and they were going to be revealed in the midst of a particular atrocity. And there was a very strong likelihood that if you had the combination of an atrocity, a Provo atrocity, and the revelation of the fact that Albert was doing deals with them, that Albert's political career would have been completely destroyed, he would have been forced out of office, and he would have gone down in Irish history as a complete failure. I mean, as someone who actually, you know, had been a bull at a china shop and had wandered into an area he didn't understand and had made terrible mistakes. And of course the whole peace process would have been set back years and years and years. So Albert does deserve enormous credit for the extent to which he didn't just take a risk with the ideas or with the strategy. He took a risk with Albert, with his own career and his own place in history.
I remember, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before the first ceasefire, I had an unusual meeting with Albert when a few days earlier there had been an appalling atrocity in Northern Ireland, and he'd been very seriously criticised in the media for not being as viciously condemnatory. Okay, he said the appropriate things, but there were other things that could have been said. And he said to me, I didn't go any further because I believe in 3 weeks we're going to have a ceasefire. Wow. They were about to have some sort of annual conference. He said, it's not going to happen at that. It's going to happen 3 weeks later. And I just said to him, well, if you believe that, you stick to your guns. And I kept my counsel and didn't tell anyone about that conversation. And we got to 3.5 weeks later, the ceasefire was declared.
It was the greatest day of my life. Nothing ever happened again in politics, as far as I was concerned. It was worth going in. I'd like to have stayed on to hopefully try and finish it. But I'll tell you, I was better able to handle the situation that developed subsequently with a short stay than I would have been beforehand if nothing had happened. This was worth everything. To go into politics, to get to the top job, to be able to do something for the Irish people, North and South, that nobody thought was possible. That's enough for anyone's life, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, there was a particularly difficult relationship developing between Albert Reynolds and Dick Spring. They were two very strong individuals, two very stubborn individuals. And when the whole Harry Wheelahan affair erupted, I could see very early on that this might lead to an election because it required one or other of them to back down, and they weren't these type of people.
The Wheelahan affair started out really as quite a straightforward thing, which was that there was a dispute between the two parties in government, Labour and Fianna Fáil, about the appointment of Harry Wheelahan, who had been the Attorney General, his appointments to be President of the High Court. Normally speaking, the Attorney General had kind of first call on big judicial appointments. So in normal circumstances, Fianna Fáil probably had a good case for saying, look, Harry Whelan's the Attorney General, President of the High Court's coming up, let's give him the job. It wasn't normal because Harry Whelan had some history, which was that as Attorney General, he'd been responsible for the infamous X case, the abortion case, where he had tried to stop an underage girl who had become pregnant as a result of rape from travelling to Britain to have an abortion. And because of that, Labour had a very dim view, really, of Harry Whelan. So you had a row, really, as to whether or not Whelan was going to be appointed. Labour walked out of Cabinet when Whelan's appointment was being pushed through by Albert Reynolds. Reynolds went ahead and appointed him anyway, and that created circumstances in which really Whelan's appointment had become a real wedge issue in terms of the government. There was a real chance that the government would fall over the appointment of Whelan.
I would say one of our problems ultimately was that Albert's idea of consultation was, you know, telling you what he had made his mind up to do. And then he told you, he wasn't consulting you, and that was part of the problem.
Labour might have backed off in terms of all of this stuff, except that they were hit by this bus, which was the Brendan Smith case. This classic paedophile priest who had, you know, wreaked havoc over all of Ireland, really, for 40 years and abroad. His extradition was being sought by the authorities in Northern Ireland. The request for the extradition had gone into Harry Whelan's office as Attorney General, and for some reason it had stayed there for months and months and months, and nothing had been done on it. And this then gave Labour a way of saying, hold on a minute, there's a real issue about this guy. Can we appoint the guy whose office has been responsible for not extraditing this paedophile priest in Northern Ireland as President of the High Court? And so the whole thing played out really as this drama which went out of control. So you got all of these issues, abortion, the differences between Labour and Fianna Fáil, and then the Brendan Smith case getting wrapped up together to create really what was a kind of juggernaut of political disaster.
The trust had broken down out of a series of events. And also, I suppose, in retrospect, as I said in relation to Garrett, there was a bond there, that there was never, that bond was never there. It was strictly business. And I think you need something more than, as I say, strictly business to keep governments together. You need chemistry, you need relationships. And it wasn't there.
Tonight, Albert Reynolds stood and watched a short film designed as a celebration of his achievements. With brutal irony, he was accepting an award for Political Eye of the Year, and the organisers could hardly have guessed he'd end up watching his own political obituary. In the crush outside, at the end of a long and dramatic day, he made only one comment.
How are you feeling at the moment after it all? A little tired.
You know, we got into this bizarre situation where Albert resigns from leader of the party. We did try and make an attempt to put a Fianna Fáil Labour coalition together again under Bertie, but we then literally crossed the floor of the House and started talking to Fine Gael and the Workers' Party. And you know, John Bruton and I, who didn't have great chemistry in previous coalitions we were in, we started putting together. Nobody wanted a general election. We'd had that experience before of snap elections. And we managed to put together a programme for government.